our first college and career readiness training. We have been partnered with Schoolhouse Connection to bring to you this amazing opportunity. Excuse me, we're excited to have this as our first training where we get to really go in deep regarding how to support our students that are going through a displaced situation, as well as college and career readiness and getting them ready to be able to be successful in their careers and graduating. Some of you already that may not know me that are on this call right now. My name again is Anna Osoria. I am the homeless liaison from Newark Board of Education. In the audience, we have school counselors, school social workers that are actively working with students on a daily basis and supporting at the ground level. So we want to thank everyone that have joined us today and that want to learn more and want to be able to support our student even better. We are already doing an amazing job, but this only is to enhance our information resources so that we can be better prepared to support our students and eliminate those barriers that are sometimes preventing them from graduating high school and then further going into college and other career options. With further ado, I want to introduce Jillian Sitar, Director of Higher Education and Partnership with Schoolhouse Connection. And I also want to welcome Karen Rice, who is the Senior Program Manager of Education Initiatives. I'm going to open up the floor to them so that they can discuss further their experiences, their knowledge in this field, and begin the presentation today. Thank you so much for your patience. And Jillian and Karen, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here with you all today. I'm Karen Rice. I'm the Senior Program Manager of Education Initiatives at Schoolhouse Connection, and I am joining you today from Madison, Wisconsin. And just a little bit about me. I have been a liaison in a district and also a state coordinator, so I've been around the McKinney-Vento world for quite a while and have been at Schoolhouse for about 2 years. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Jillian.
Good morning, everyone. My name, again, thanks for having us, Anna. My name is Jillian Sitar. I am the Director of Higher Education Partnerships. I am based in Philadelphia, and I have been with Schoolhouse for over 5 years. But prior to this role, my background is in higher education and student affairs. So I worked on the college system, specifically within housing and in multiculturalism. The Schoolhouse Connection was a perfect merger between my two interests that I had, and I am so happy to share some of the best practices to help with college and career readiness. And hopping on just to do a brief introduction of yourself.
Hi, I'm sorry, was that question for me? The computer cut out quite a bit. I assumed it was a quick introduction. Okay. Hi, I'm Lexi Giampa. I am a student at Oregon State University studying human development and family sciences, and I'm hoping to pursue a master's degree in art therapy, and I have been a Schoolhouse Connection scholar since 2021.
Thanks, Lexi. All right, well, just very briefly, if you are not familiar with Schoolhouse Connection, this is a little bit about who we are. We work to overcome homelessness through education in a variety of different ways. And so the expertise on our team really spans quite a range, everywhere from pre-K to post-secondary. We work across all of the early childhood K-12 system and higher education. We also do work with state and federal policy advocacy, and we have our youth leadership and scholarship program. And we are going to talk more about that. And that is really kind of the jewel in our Schoolhouse crown. And so stay tuned for in a little bit here in our presentation where we'll tell you a little bit more about our scholarship program and how you can share that information with your students. All right, so just very briefly, here's where we're headed today. So we're going to start with just some kind of basic level setting and, providing some context to the work that we're going to do and talk about today. We'll talk about the requirements in the law and some best practices, and then we'll transition into hearing about FAFSA and best practices around that. And we also have the pleasure of hearing from Lexi today as well. So this is just kind of our plan for where we're going, but let's jump right in because, of course, our time is limited and we've got a lot to talk about. So I always like to start with just a brief overview of McKinney-Vento. And I'm certain that you are familiar with McKinney-Vento, you've been around McKinney-Vento, but really just to kind of level set for us and to make sure we're all on the same page with this. The McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act is a federal law that was originally passed in 1987, but of course was updated and reauthorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015. So McKinney-Vento applies to all public schools and public charter schools with the purpose and goal of ensuring identification, enrollment, and success in school for our children and youth experiencing homelessness. And so it really tries to level the playing field for our children and youth to make sure that they have the support that they need to be successful. So when we talk about McKinney-Vento, this is what we're looking at in terms of the definition. So under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, we're looking at children and youth experiencing homelessness as children who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And so anytime we're working with students and we're kind of evaluating those situations of, might this be a situation where the student is experiencing homelessness or not, we're really looking at through this lens. And so just to kind of, again, provide a little bit of context and level setting for you on that, we're looking to make sure that it's fixed, regular, and adequate. So can the student go to the same place every night to sleep in a safe and sufficient space? So we're looking at whether it's a stationary or permanent, not subject to change kind of living situation, whether it's used consistently on the kind of the same predictable routine basis. And then with the adequacy, is it sufficient for meeting the physical and psychological needs of the student that are typically met in a home environment? So we really want to take a look at that and make sure that we're considering that adequacy piece and making sure that that's fixed, regular, and adequate. And so when we identify our students, we really do want to make sure all three of those are present. And so just to provide you with some New Jersey specific data, because it's always good to kind of know what we're looking at here. This is from the 2020-2021 school year, and this is from our data profiles that's posted on our website. So if you've not had a chance to take a look at that, I would encourage you to do that. It is live linked in here, and so we will make sure that you have a copy of these slides so that you have access to these links. Of course, we know that in 2021, things were a little bit unique in that we were kind of dealing with the pandemic and all that went around that. And so consider this data as kind of a snapshot, right? We know that it has changed and that it was different probably before the pandemic. And so this is just looking at a snapshot of this. But during that school year, 10,539 children pre-K through 12th grade were identified as experiencing homelessness, or roughly about 0.8% of the student population. Now, this is actually pretty low. And so, again, we contribute that to the pandemic, but really want to know that part of this process and working with students and supporting their college and career readiness is that identification piece. And so school counselors, school staff, anyone who's kind of working with that college and career readiness, you are a crucial part of the identification process. And we can't do any of this support around supporting our students to get to their post-secondary options if we're not identifying them first. So I also wanted to share the graduation rates with you, just again from the same school year, so that you could kind of just take a look at that and take a look at the difference in our students who are graduating, as well as the FAFSA determinations. So Jillian is going to talk more about FAFSA and some of the post-secondary side of that in just a little bit. But again, wanted to just kind of give you this data so that you could have it and take a look at it. Again, this is statewide data. Okay, so let's jump in and take a look at what are the requirements under McKinney-Vento and what are our best practices. So we really want to look at what does the law require us to do for those who are working with our students experiencing homelessness. So from a state level perspective, McKinney-Vento requires that state education or that state homeless education plans describe how school counselors will provide college preparation and readiness assistance to our students experiencing homelessness. So probably at the state level, there's information on this. And if you're not familiar with that, I would make sure that you are connecting with your state coordinator and your state level staff to make sure that you are following what has been laid out in the state plan. But essentially what the law says is that we want to make sure that our counselors are providing support, college readiness support to any student that's identified under McKinney-Vento to help prepare them for their college or career readiness, whatever that opportunity is that they're going to be pursuing after they graduate. So that might look like support, individualized counseling around college selection, the application process, financial aid, helping to make those connections with on-campus supports for when students are moving into kind of that transition time into a school opportunity. And part of that and getting students to that place where they are transitioning into their post-secondary plans is really working to provide that full and partial credits for our students experiencing homelessness. So the law does require us to make sure that we are providing full or partial credits for coursework that's completed. And so we're going to jump into that in a minute and talk a little bit more in depth about that. But in order to help make sure our students are on track, that's a critical piece. And so we want to make sure that we're really looking at what work did our students complete? What did they have at their previous school that we can apply to make sure that they're on that track toward graduation and getting to those post-secondary plans? And of course, it's really important that we're looking at these specifically for our unaccompanied youth. For all students, it's important, but specifically for our unaccompanied youth because they may not have the support at home. And so I didn't mention this on my previous slide while we were talking about McKinney-Vento, but an unaccompanied youth is a student who meets that definition of homeless under McKinney-Vento. So again, lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. But an unaccompanied youth is a student who's also not under the care of a parent or legal guardian. So not under that physical custody with a legal guardian. And so it's extra important that we're making sure that we're looking specifically at how to support our unaccompanied youth. So let's take a look at some best practices. So that's what the law says. And so I want to start out by saying that partnership between the liaison or the building point of contact and school partner and school counselors is a critical partnership to making sure that our students have the support that they need. So again, school counselors are an important part of that identification process. Anybody who's working regularly with students is an important piece of that identification process, right? So we know that the liaison or the building point of contact probably is not interacting with all students all of the time, but students have relationships with different people within the school setting. And so a school counselor or a school social worker might hear of a change in a student's living situation. And it's important for school staff to know exactly what that process is to make sure that that student is identified so that we can provide these supports and services. So again, we want to make sure that that partnership is in place and we know who it is that we need to collaborate with to do all of the things that we just talked about that are required. So it's important for counselors and liaisons to work together so that counselors know who those students are that are experiencing homelessness to provide support. And one of the questions that we always get asked at Schoolhouse is kind of how does that work with FERPA and sharing that information? And so counselors have a legitimate educational need to know who those students are in order to provide that college and career readiness support. And so it is important that counselors have that information. So we want to make sure, again, that liaisons and counselors are partnering together to really look at students' transcripts and how those credits can be awarded, either partial or full credits. And so maybe that looks like a partnership to reach out to the previous school to find out more about coursework that was being completed, or advocating for students to make sure that partial credits are being added to transcripts, things like that. But that partnership to really look at those partial credits will be important. And then also supporting students with college applications, obtaining fee waivers for college application fees, any fee waivers for the SAT or the ACT, and helping support students through securing their letters of recommendation. So these are all things, again, that the liaison or the building point of contact can do in partnership with the school counselor. And I always like to say that the liaison or the building point of contact is one person and can't do everything. And so this collaboration is really key to make sure that we're following what the law says, but also what we're doing for that's the best interest of our students. Okay, so part of that then too is also making sure that we're supporting students in accessing things like college visits, college fairs, whatever that opportunity is to help our students know what their options are. And when I was a liaison in a school district, I can tell you that so many of the students that I worked with felt like they didn't have options. And so we had to work really hard to make sure that our students knew, here are the options you have. Here's where you could go to school. Here's, our community colleges and our four-year colleges and our trade school programs. And so we really wanted to make sure that students had all of the big picture ideas of what their options were so that we could support them in getting to that. And not just knowing what they were going to do after they left, but then also supporting that while they were in school. And so sometimes that meant helping students select classes differently so that they were taking classes that met with those interests and also could help prepare them for whatever they wanted to do after they graduated. But really helping to look at all of those options and finding out what those interests and skills were. We also, of course, want to make sure that we're supporting our students in completing the FAFSA, or the free application for federal student aid. And again, Jillian's going to talk more specifically about the FAFSA, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. But part of that support is providing a letter verifying the status of an unaccompanied homeless youth. And so we do have resources on our website to help with that verification, but that's an important piece of making sure that students have access to that financial aid. And then also looking at what other financial aid opportunities exist. And so that'll be an important piece. One of those options, of course, is our Schoolhouse Connection scholarship, which I'll talk more about in a few minutes. But really looking at kind of that broad perspective of what opportunities might be available, not only through FAFSA, but locally or within the college or state, other opportunities for students to apply. So that's kind of the big picture, really high level look at what is required and what our best practices. And we're going to dig into some more of that. But we're going to take a minute to transition to hear from Lexi, because a lot of what I just talked about, Lexi can give us her perspective on. And so, Lexi, I will ask you, if you don't mind sharing with us, if you want to say anything else to introduce yourself, but then I will also start by asking, how did you learn that you were an unaccompanied homeless youth?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here today. Um, I would say I don't have much more to introduce myself, besides the fact that I'm a student and I am eager to learn about human development and family science to better understand my own story, and be able to help those in the future. So that's something I'm really passionate about. Um, all the things I've experienced have helped me in a lot more ways than I could have imagined. So how I found out I was an unhoused youth. So the way that that went about for me was interesting. I lived with 6 different families all throughout high school. So I definitely did lack adequate housing. Um, the majority of the homes that I lived in were not the safest as well. My biological parents were not checking in to see what families I was living with. They just were okay with me being taken care of by whomever. So that was, as it was mentioned, some things were not the safest as well. So not only was I frequently moving around, but I wasn't in safe environments um, and reliable environments. So the way I found that out was actually my senior year of high school, which is a bit frustrating for me to look back on. I was filling out the FAFSA, as we'll be talking about more today, and I knew that I needed a letter to help me um, get through FAFSA. And also, I didn't have any of my parents' tax information. I didn't know any of that. I wasn't in contact with them. So I found out actually as I was filling out the FAFSA that I was considered an unhoused youth. And that was a huge shock to me because I didn't know collectively what the definition of homelessness was at the time. I had a very fixed viewpoint of it that it meant you were literally on the street. So for me, I never once considered myself an unhoused youth. And then through FAFSA, I realized that I did meet that definition as I was self supporting myself, living in different homes. And yeah, I was just lacking that consistency. Um, so how did I get connected with my liaison? It was again through FAFSA. So I knew I needed to get a letter, and my My school has something called the Aspire Center. I'm sure that some schools have similar things. It's like a college career readiness program. So students go and they get to learn how to apply for things, and all the assistance they might need will be in that center. So I was a frequent goer of this college career readiness center, and I was told I needed to contact my liaison. Well, for me, I am a 2021 graduate. So my junior year was in the middle of COVID. So for me, things were a little bit different. I didn't have the opportunity to meet my liaison in person. I emailed them and told them about my story, and they said, okay, you meet the requirements. And they wrote me a letter. So I never actually had that in person connection with them, which is something that I wish I had that ability to have back at that time. So that's a very specific situation for me. Like I said, I didn't have that direct connection. So for advice that I would have for liaisons, I kind of came up with these three little words that I liked, which was identify, connect, and direct. So for me, um, even though I had a liaison, I actually never was really connected with the resources that were available for me. I had no clue that I had access to food resources, clothing, um, hygiene products for free. So I was working full time trying to support myself, and I didn't know that there was these things that were all offered around me. So for identify, I would say, like, can you spot that someone is experiencing homelessness, or can you find out through teachers' recommendations that maybe someone needs to be checked in on? For connect, just like making a connection with students, showing them that you care for students. And for me, like, that is what meant the world to me, was knowing that an adult cared about me and my safety and motivated me for my future. Like, that, those little things that might not seem as prominent for you as the adult mean the world for the children. So just want you to know that connection is huge. And then direction, offering resources, like Karen was saying, showing people, here's some food, here's some clothing, like, what resources does your school offer? So that is my advice. I was a high achieving student as well. So for me, it was an interesting situation. I did not want I did not want people to really know my situation. I was trying to kind of fit in, but my school knew things such as that my sports fees were being waived because I couldn't pay for them. So there was little things that were kind of in between the cracks where you could spot that there was something going on, but all the pieces didn't really get put together. So I wasn't identified until my senior year, and so I wasn't able to receive those resources.
Thanks, Lexi. So I want to kind of transition and pause here and just talk about our scholarship for a minute. So Lexi is one of our Schoolhouse Connection scholars, and we really want to get the word out about this scholarship. This is a really amazing scholarship opportunity for students. And I think what makes it so unique from other scholarships that are out there is that we have staff on our team who are providing that one-on-one support for students. So it's not just a financial scholarship, although that is important, but it's also that support from our director and from our case manager, who really help connect with students and really build those relationships and provide that person to be a support. Students also get to participate in 3 all-expense paid trips. So this is a really great opportunity to do some different things that students might not otherwise have access to. And so if you have youth that you're working with, we would love for you to share this information with them. Again, we will make sure that you have access to these slides so that you have access to that link to go right to our website. But it is, thanks Jillian, just put it in the chat for us. But all of it is there, and the eligibility criteria is there as well. So please share this with your students. It's a really unique scholarship, and it's a really great opportunity to help connect your students experiencing homelessness into our scholarship program. Okay, I am going to turn it back over to Lexi.
So, my experience with this program, I want to very truthfully say that this scholarship has genuinely changed my life. I can't like reiterate that enough. It has showed me that I have a passion for helping other people, that I have a voice, and that I can share my story. I completely changed my college pathway from this program, and it'll affect people differently, but genuinely for me, it helped me find myself, and it helped me find other people that I could connect with, which for me, as someone experiencing homelessness in high school, I felt I felt so isolated in a lot of ways. I felt like I had friends, but we never really connected on that kind of deep level of understanding our situations and our upbringings and our struggles. And through meeting 7 other people all across the United States, it's created these lifelong connections that I know when I'm feeling scared, when I'm feeling sad, I can reach out to this group. We have social media groups where we stay in contact almost daily. We check in with each other. We're like a huge family. And I remember initially hearing about this and it seemed way too good to be true. I genuinely didn't know if it was real. And then I went, and this is kind of the joke because it seems so good to be true, but it is. It's just an amazing life-changing program that I can't recommend enough. I think more people need to know about Schoolhouse. So just know they will support you endlessly, and it just means the world for kids. So
Thanks, Lexi. All right, so I want to transition now and just talk a little bit about helping students to get to that point where they're graduating and they're transitioning into kind of whatever those college or career plans are after school. And I want to start by talking about awarding and accepting partial credits. This is really important, and there's not always a really clear path to do this. I know that in Wisconsin, when I was the state coordinator, we convened a group of liaisons from across the state, and we said, we want to know how it is that you're doing this. And we had 15 liaisons that we were meeting, and we got 15 different responses of what this actually looked like. And so there's a lot of different considerations that we can take into account when we're looking at awarding and accepting partial credits. But like I said, this is really crucial to make sure that we are helping students to stay on track towards graduation and getting into whatever those post-secondary plans are. So these are considerations. These are not requirements, but I want to leave these here for you. So when we're looking at partial credits, it's really important to keep in mind that what is fair is not always equal or the same. And so every student's situation is different. The credits and the courses that someone has taken might look really different than what someone else has done. And so it's really important to look at these on a case-by-case basis. And since we do that anyway under McKinney-Vento when we're identifying students, this is another one of those areas that we can really look at kind of that individual experience and circumstance. So procedures are important. It's good to have a process and to kind of know how to do that and how to go about awarding partial credits. But it's really important that we're looking at that flexibility. And so again, what works in one situation might not work the same in another situation. And so because we're required to address those barriers and to make sure that we are doing this awarding and accepting partial credits, it's important that we're working together. And so if you hear nothing else from me, that collaboration is really key to doing all of this and to working together. So whether it's school counselors, registrars, administrators, liaisons, building points of contact, whoever that is, these are really important partnerships to make sure that we're being able to award and accept partial credits to students. So we want to make sure that we're innovating and advocating for students. And sometimes that means not doing things how they've always been done, but really looking at what is a new way to do things or what might be most effective and efficient for our students. And so when we're looking at this, of course, we always want to start with immediate enrollment. And so anytime we have students who are coming in from another school or another district, we want to make sure that we get them in school immediately, even though we probably don't have their school records right there on hand to know what classes to put them in. And so this partnership between counselors and liaisons and other staff who work directly with students is a great way to reach out to the person that the student worked with in their prior school. And so whether that's the liaison reaching out to another liaison or a counselor or building point of contact reaching out, that's the best way to find out. You don't have to have records to place students in a class. You can have a conversation about what was the student doing, where was the student at with their coursework, and meet with the student. This is a really, really important idea as well, because students know what they were doing. They know what classes they were in. They know what work that they had completed. So involve the student in this process as you're trying to find kind of an equivalent class to either place the student in or to look at what they might be able to get credit for. And then it's okay if you place a student in a class to go back and check with that student after a week or two to make sure that they're either in something that's the right fit. So If you put a student in an algebra class and you find out in a week or two that that student had actually already done all of that work, then it's okay to not leave that student in that class, and to really find out what is the best placement for the student. You can also do that after receiving the official school records from the prior school. And so it's kind of that check back and check in to make sure that students are in the appropriate classes, both before receiving the records and after. And then when it comes to calculating and awarding partial credits, one of the key pieces to this is knowing how to enter them onto the transcript. And so again, when I was the state coordinator and we were meeting with these liaisons and we were hearing about these 15 different ways that liaisons were awarding partial credits in their district, one of the things that came up consistently was trying to figure out how to make sure those were actually entered onto the students' transcripts. And so in some cases, it was through the student information system. In some cases, it was through specific approval by a principal. And so it really looked different. And so work with the staff in your building to know how to make sure that if you're deciding that a student should get partial credit for a specific class, that you know exactly how to put that onto the transcript so that it will be there and the student won't end up being short credits when they're getting toward graduation. And then think about different ways that we can award partial credit. So this is just a very high level kind of quick overview of this partial credit process. It can be more complicated, and we do have a resource here that goes into more detail on this. But we want to really look at different ways to award partial credit. So when we have students moving into our school from another school or another district, we want to look at where they've been, what classes they've done, what work they've accomplished, but then also how can we look for ways to award those credits, maybe through something like work experience or project-based learning or an independent study or a proficiency exam. And so again, you're going to want to make sure that you have a process for this and you know what is allowable in what's allowable in Newark or what isn't, but really looking at kind of those creative ways. And so one story I always like to share is a youth that I worked with who is an unaccompanied youth. And he had some pretty significant financial obligations to the family that he was temporarily staying with. And so he needed to leave school early to work. And so we kind of, through some number of creative channels, were able to get him some work experience credit so that he could also be doing that at the same time that he was doing his job. And so it was kind of a way to get that kind of dual, he was working and he was earning money and doing what he needed to do to meet his financial obligations, but he was also getting that work experience and apprenticeship credit through our school district. So we could really meet his needs in that unique circumstance. And without that work experience credit, to be honest, it was long enough ago. I can't remember if we did it as work experience or apprenticeship, but it was one of the two. He was able to make sure that he was on track toward graduation because he was short of credits. And so we were able to kind of think about this unique circumstance to give him these partial credit or to give him the full credit in order to get on track toward graduation and to meet his specific needs. So sometimes it's really thinking about what are those creative ways and what are those unique ways that we can support our students who might have unique circumstances, but also who might need some additional support with getting toward graduation. And then finally, that accepting partial credits is really important. And so if you have a partial credit that was put on a transcript by the prior school, we want to make sure that we're honoring and accepting whatever those partial credits are. And so we have certainly heard of situations where a student has enrolled in a new school and the school has said, we're not going to accept this. This was put on here. We don't know if we agree with it. We don't know anything about it. It's on the transcript. We're not going to really take this into consideration. And so I would again challenge you to say, let's look at that and let's see how can we really make sure that we're honoring and accepting what that partial school or that previous school has determined as necessary and applicable. And then one other piece of advice I would give you when it comes to partial credits is making sure to apply credits toward the requirement that they're intended to meet. So again, one of the questions that we get all the time is, well, should we just put this into an elective credit, or should we just take this work that the student has done and put it into an elective credit? And so there's only so many elective credits that students need, but they need math credits and they need social studies and English. So let's make sure that we're really looking at those specific classes so that the credits meet the needs of what the student needs to do in order to stay on track toward graduation. So one way that we can think about doing this, awarding and accepting partial credits, is through transcript audits. And transcript audits are really a dropout prevention strategy because we know that students who can't see progress toward graduation are more likely to drop out. And students who get behind in credits early in their high school time in 9th grade might continue to be behind throughout their whole high school time unless they can get caught up. And so it's really important that we're looking at transcripts. Again, this is just a strategy that I will offer you, but looking at that data and looking at what those graduation rates are, and looking at the graduation cohorts, whether students are graduating in 4-year, 5-year, or 6-year cohorts, pay attention to when your students experiencing homelessness are graduating and what other supports might they need to be able to graduate in a 4-year cohort instead of a 5-year cohort. We know that there's only so many exits to get off the highway, right? There's only so many cohorts that students can get through to graduate. And so it's really important to help students understand what their credits are and what they need, and then to support them in earning those credits and applying those partial or full credits. So we want to make sure that we're connecting with our students, keeping them on track towards graduation. And this is a great way to engage with our students and to make sure that if we haven't connected with them, transcript audits are a great way to do that in a different way. And this will support the overall graduation rate as well, because if you remember back to our data when we looked at that, I know it was the 2020-2021 school year, but the graduation rate for our students experiencing homelessness was lower than our students who were not experiencing homelessness. And so we really want to level the playing field for all of our students. So I want to just offer you briefly a case study. This was a school district that Schoolhouse Connection partnered with in New York State. And what we did with them was we really looked at their process and their policies around partial credits. We looked at their graduation requirements, and then we developed guidance for their school counselors around what partial credit awarding and accepting might look like. We provided them with a template to do a transcript audit. And in New York, the only person that can approve that partial credit or full credit is the school principal. And so we developed a communication tool for them to use to request that acceptance from the principal. So again, I've linked in those tools if that's helpful to see. And you will have access to these slides to take a look at those. And so once we'd kind of put all of that onto paper and really looked at that, we provided training to the 6 school counselors in their high school in the district. And then we asked all of the counselors to do a transcript audit on any of their students experiencing homelessness. And so recognizing that this is a small school district, they had only about 48 students that they were doing these transcript audits with. But they really dug into the transcripts of all of these 48 students in their high school. They looked at their identified students, they looked at their progress toward graduation, they went back and looked at where they had been previously and what other school districts, and looked at how they were on track toward graduation then. And then they looked at where their progress toward graduation was currently within their school district. And so it was actually really successful in terms of they found, I will say they found a number of partial credits for their students, but it was really successful in challenging their counselors to think differently about how they were reviewing transcripts and to really intentionally dig into what that looked like for each student. And the counselors met individually with each of the students. Now, I know, again, it's easier in a small district, but they had a chance to sit down with their students and really talk about their progress toward graduation, which also opened up the conversation to talk about what are your post-secondary plans? What are you interested in? Where do you want to head to? And because this went really well for their counselors, they are planning to scale this up to other highly mobile populations and to take this guidance. And so when you have access to those tools, I would encourage you to take a look at those if you have a few minutes. All right, so I want to shift gears just a little bit, but still talking again about that post-secondary transition and higher education. And I want to talk about higher education opportunities for undocumented youth. And so when we're talking about our students who are undocumented, our immigrant students who are undocumented, we really want to think about just knowing that there are options for these students, but they don't look the same as they might for someone who is documented. So for example, a student who is undocumented cannot fill out the FAFSA. And so we don't want to encourage our students to do that who are undocumented, but it also might lead to a really hard conversation with students. When I was a liaison, I ended up talking with a student who did not know that she was undocumented. She was an unaccompanied youth and she was undocumented. And when we sat down to talk about what are your plans, what are you thinking of, what do you want to do after you graduate, we started talking about her financial aid opportunities. And through kind of all of our conversations and her conversation with another family member, we learned that the student was not documented and so could not complete the FAFSA. Now, I do want to say with the caveat to that, if a student is documented, but the parents are undocumented, the student can still apply for federal financial aid under FAFSA. So it gets a little bit complicated. But again, thinking through that conversation and how you might need to have some of those hard conversations, don't be afraid to bring in other people. Don't be afraid to partner with your multilingual learner staff, your ESL teachers, or whoever those folks are in your buildings who might have different connections to students or who might feel more comfortable having those conversations with students. Undocumented youth can apply to public colleges and universities in every state except Alabama and South Carolina, so they can in New Jersey. And a number of states offer in-state tuition or state financial aid to undocumented students. And so I linked in so that you can check on what your state offers and you can take a look at that. And I will say that sometimes this changes. And so kind of with the changing political tide, sometimes this can change what our undocumented students have access to. And so I will tell you that several years ago that happened in the state of Wisconsin, that we had a change in governor and then it changed what our undocumented students have access to. So please make sure that you're kind of keeping updated on that when you're talking with your students. All right. So as we're working on thinking through how to support our students and how to kind of help with that transition between high school and post-secondary, I wanted to just offer a few minutes to talk about using our ARPHCY funds. So these are the American Rescue Plan Homeless Children and Youth Funds that were part of the COVID federal relief dollars, specifically to support our children and youth experiencing homelessness with their unique needs, kind of in light of all that happened with COVID and the pandemic. And so this is a great way to also support your undocumented youth, be thinking through how you can use your funds to support undocumented youth through this process, but all students who are going from that high school to post-secondary transition. So one way is to add capacity, thinking through adding extra hours or staff contracts that you can extend. I mentioned the transcript audits that we did in Rome City, New York, and this was one way that they gave stipends to their counseling staff to do those transcript audits. They used their funds to help support that extra time that the counselors needed to really dig into those transcripts. So that's a great way to do it. It's a great way to think about graduation coaches, FAFSA mentors, transition coordinators, extra school counselor time to work on FAFSA, college applications, things like that. There are certainly places that have provided funds for college students to mentor and provide peer support to current high school students. And that's a great way for students to kind of see themselves in that higher education setting. They can, this youth did it, I can do it too, and really provide kind of those models and mentors for them. Funds can be used to take students on local college tours in the area. So again, helping students to be aware of what their options are. And providing laptops, hotspots, all of those things that students need while they're in high school to complete their FAFSA, their applications, things like that. We want to make sure that they have the technology that they need. And of course, participating in trainings to stay up to date on the new FAFSA changes is also a great way to use funds. So we do have a resource here that talks more about how you can specifically use these funds to support your students as they make that transition. So that was a lot of information. I know that we went very quickly through that. So I want to just pause for a minute and ask if there are any questions. I see that there is one in the chat. Are there specific partial credit amounts for a 5-credit course? For a 2.5 credit course, who determines the level of credits? That is an excellent question. And actually, Anna, I don't know if you want to answer that question or if you want to circle back to that one, but that's probably a specific Newark response.
Hi, Karen. I'm actually our supervisor of high schools. is in the training as well. So what I'm going to refer is all school counselors that may have specific questions regarding that process. You want to make sure that you are communicating with Mr. Pullins, related questions to credits and things of that nature. The goal of today is to overall information how to support displaced students, but more specific to Newark Board of Ed, you want to make sure that you're connecting with Mr. Pullins and those questions. But if you would like to share a specific, I mean, a general will be helpful as well, Karen.
Yeah, it really varies. In my experience, it really varies on kind of what looking at. It's usually, looking at kind of what work was completed. So like if 50% of a course was completed in a prior school before moving, then looking at what that 50%, how kind of that 50% equivalent meets. And so, for example, one of the ways that we did this when I was a liaison is our school used quarters. And so we had semesters, but we also had quarters kind of within the semesters. And so if a student had really completed basically 50% of a course, we had them in a study hall typically until we got to that second quarter, and then could have them start at that second quarter, and we'd give them the partial credit for the first quarter of that semester. So it gets a little complicated, and it gets a little bit kind of looking at, okay, how can we not duplicate the work that they've done? But it really depends on how kind of what the systems are. With that district in New York that I mentioned, they use marking periods, and it was really different than anything that I had learned about. And so they had very specific metrics for their marking periods. So I will leave that more up to the specifics of your team there, but I'm happy to share some more examples if that would be helpful. But if there are any other questions, we'll pause for just a minute. And you can definitely keep those coming in, and we can always circle back to questions as well. All right, well, I will turn it over to Jillian. And again, feel free to keep putting those questions in the chat, and we can always come back to those.
Awesome. All right, so we are now going to transition and talk about college students experiencing homelessness. And typically when we're talking about college students, we have to talk about financial aid and the FAFSA. So we can go on to the next slide here. I actually went to a conference last week in Dallas called NCAN, the National College Attainment Network. And we talked a lot about the value and importance of higher education, especially since there's been this increased skepticism about students going to college, specifically when they are up against an opportunity to go get a job where they can get, $50 an hour, $16 an hour. More and more students, more and more families are saying maybe higher education isn't worth it, especially with the high cost of tuition. But we know from just the data that some form of post-secondary education is necessary for high-paying, good-paying jobs, which will allow students and families to afford housing, have that financial independence. So we're always trying to promote some sort of post-secondary education, whatever that may be. In addition to have a high-paying job, higher education can also be a protective factor against youth homelessness. So we saw this from a 2019 Chapin Hall study that saw that four-year college enrollment is nearly 4 times higher for young adults without experiences of homelessness in the prior month. And then more data, specifically in Washington, this was a survey from last year, but we're also seeing it across other states. Students who come from families with lower household incomes tend to see a higher economic status rise within years of earning a degree and entering the labor force. And so on the next slide here, you'll see that financial aid truly does make a difference, and that high school seniors that complete the FAFSA are 84% more likely to enroll in higher education. And the more amount of aid that a student receives, the higher likelihood that the student will either successfully transfer or graduate. And at the conference, I also heard that if the student doesn't go from high school, transition directly into a post-secondary education, if they tend to take a gap year, they are there's a 30% chance that they will actually enroll into a post-secondary institution, which I thought was pretty interesting, especially thinking about the pandemic and so many of our students that maybe took a gap year because of virtual learning. So I really challenge all the folks here that are working with your seniors, make sure that you are really trying to push the importance of going into college right away so that they can hopefully pursue that post-secondary degree and not take a gap year, which further decreases their likelihood of pursuing a post-secondary degree. All right, on to our next slide here. So, Karen provided a really great overview of kind of the systems that are set in place to identify students experiencing homelessness in the K through 12 system. Unfortunately, we do not have that on the higher ed side, but we are trying. So you might have heard about the Hope Center. They have done a lot of reports and surveys over the last few years looking at basic needs and security. This was a report that they did in 2021, and you can see that about 3 in 5 students experience some sort of basic needs insecurity. A lot of students, obviously food insecurity, but then if you shift and look at housing insecurity and homelessness, about 14% of students, both within a 4-year and a 2-year institution, as well as 48% of students, so almost half of students, face some sort of housing insecurity. So this number was pulled from about 200,000 students from over 202 colleges and universities, and this was from the fall of 2020. So as I mentioned, a lot of students might not have returned to college between their spring 2020 and fall 2020 because of the pandemic, or students took that gap year. So we actually imagine that this number should be a lot higher than what is reflected in the numbers in the survey. But for the first time ever in the history, we actually have data from the Federal Department of Education. So this is from the National Center for Education Statistics, which again falls under Department of Education. And they found that about 23% of undergraduate students are experiencing food insecurity, and then 8% of undergraduate students are experiencing homelessness. So a little bit lower numbers than what we're seeing from the Hope Center, but this was pulled from the spring of 2020. So as we recall, the pandemic happened in March of 2020. So these numbers, this data that we have is from a pretty unique year, but it's still nice to have this kind of like baseline number of seeing that, okay, there are students on our campus that are facing homelessness, are experiencing food insecurity, and we need to do more to help support them because there are all these systems set in place in the K through 12 level. But then once they get to the higher education side, they don't have that same support, but these students are still there. So what can we do? Okay, next slide here. Karen already mentioned this, but just want to reiterate, when we're talking about homelessness on the FAFSA, we're only talking specifically about unaccompanied homeless youth or unaccompanied youth who are self-supporting and at risk of homelessness. So on the graphic, you can kind of see that how that's broken down. So unaccompanied, not in physical custody of a legal parent or guardian. Homeless, using the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, lacking fixed, regular, and adequate housing. And then self-supporting and at risk of homelessness, when a student pays for their own living expenses, including that fixed, regular, and adequate housing, and when a student's housing may cease to be fixed, regular, and adequate. So for example, that can be a student who is being evicted and has been unable to find that fixed, regular, and adequate housing. So on the FAFSA, there is a question about homelessness. And when they're talking about homelessness, they're specifically talking about unaccompanied homeless youth, because unaccompanied homeless youth are considered independent students, meaning they do not need to include parental information on the FAFSA, which is great because they're unaccompanied. However, you might be thinking, all right, well, what about our students who are homeless, but they're with their families, so they are accompanied? Yes, they are still homeless, but they would not answer yes on the homeless question. So they would need to include parental information on the FAFSA. And I'll talk a little bit more about how those students and how those families can work with financial aid to see if there are additional help and supports and resources available. So just moving forward, I'm going to shorthand and just say unaccompanied homeless youth, but know that I'm talking about unaccompanied youth who are self-supporting and at risk of homelessness as well. All right. Our next slide here. We did a report last year and we're going to do another one soon, so keep an eye out. We analyzed data over the last 8 years rather for homeless and foster youth. So if you want to learn more about the report, you can scan the QR code or visit the link once you get a copy. And we found that over the between the 2 years, the 2019 and 2020, 2021 school year, unaccompanied homeless youth determinations declined by about 10%, which is a quite drastic amount. And then foster youth also declined by about 7%. So we've seen a decline, and we're still seeing the remnants of the pandemic having an effect on our FAFSA numbers. But if we go to the next slide, it's really cool to see this line graph. We're looking specifically at unaccompanied homeless youth determinations by school district. So you can see from 2013 up until 2020, kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. But what's really interesting is at 2016, boom, there's a giant 13.5% jump. And that's because, as Karen mentioned, in 2015, there were amendments into McKinney-Vento. And one of those amendments were about FAFSA. And it said, McKinney-Vento Liaison, you must let all of your unaccompanied homeless youth know that they are independent students on the FAFSA, meaning they don't need to include parental information. As a result from this amendment, there's a giant 13.5% jump, which is huge. And so I love this slide because it shows the impact that policy has, like truly the impact. You're seeing the numbers. And when I talk about the FAFSA simplification updates for homeless and foster youth, we hope to see another giant increase in this line graph. But for right now, we've seen a kind of a steady decline going on. Again, seeing the pandemic's impact on these numbers. And we have the 21-22 data. And unfortunately, the school district liaison unaccompanied homeless youth determinations continue to decline. So that year was the last year that we're hoping to see a decline. And again, we're hoping for that giant jump up now that the FAFSA provisions are in place. All right, next slide here. I pulled the specific New Jersey numbers for y'all to see. And I mean, a giant jump between 2019 and 2020. That's about a 27% jump, which is pretty significant for our homeless youth. And then for our foster youth, it's about 14% decline. So quite higher than the averages that we were seeing from all the states nationally, but just wanted to show that specific for the state here. All right, on to our next slide. The FAFSA simplification update. We can go on to the next one too, Karen. So the FAFSA Simplification Act was signed in 2020, and there were a lot of changes for the FAFSA. So it was implemented in different phases. The homeless and foster youth provisions went into effect in last year's FAFSA, 23-24. Guidance came out in November and in April saying, hey, these homeless and foster youth provisions are now in effect. But if you recall, the FAFSA comes out typically in October. So there was a little bit of disconnect between what was shown on the FAFSA versus what is in the law specifically for homeless and foster youth. But moving forward for this FAFSA 24-25, all the homeless and foster youth provisions are in effect now. So we should be good to move forward. But what is interesting is that, it's October 23rd, which means we've already passed the October 1st deadline. So if you haven't heard or haven't been paying attention, the 24-25 FAFSA is delayed until December. We do not know the exact date in December yet. This was causing a lot of anxiety at the conference that I went to last week in Dallas, but it can be December 1st, it can be December 31st. We do not know yet, but this means that there might be a shortened amount of time for students to fill out the FAFSA and really assess their financial aid and their need to make an informed college decision. So there are some things that y'all can be doing right now to be proactive and stay up to date until when the FAFSA is available in whatever date in December. You'll get a copy of this PowerPoint, but some bullet points I want to highlight is one, you can start identifying your unaccompanied homeless youth and then providing them with determinations. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then another big piece, this is what was really being pushed. We want all students to create FSA IDs. So that's something that students and families can be doing right now because FSA IDs can take up to 3 days to get processed and the accounts to be made. And if students are experiencing homelessness with their families, parents also need to create FSA IDs. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but just wanted to put that on your radar, start thinking like, all right, there's things that we can be doing right now to help prepare for the FAFSA that will be available come December. Next slide. I'm going to be talking through the different FAFSA provisions. And so as you're hearing this, you might be like, I thought we're doing this already. Like, you're not really telling me anything new, Jillian. That's because a lot of this guidance, a lot of these changes already should have been happening. But we know that that wasn't necessarily the case. But these changes are now in the law. It's not just guidance. So we have that to hold a little bit more weight because this is all codified in the law now. But the biggest key change is that unaccompanied homeless youth or former foster youth are presumed to be independent for each subsequent year at the same institution. So what this means is that if an unaccompanied homeless youth or a former foster youth has been determined as such, they will be independent moving forward every single year that they are filling out the FAFSA, as long as they are at the same institution and their situation has not changed. So if you identified a student last year in the 23-24 FAFSA, when they're filling out this year's FAFSA, that question should be carried over and pre-populated. And the student might just have to say, yep, that still is correct. They'll just tell the school, yep, that situation is still the same. Boom, that's it. This means that this is streamlined. Unaccompanied homeless youth no longer need to provide a determination every single year, which tends to be a little bit, re-traumatizing for our students, but also it was a hassle for a student to go around trying to get this determination. But now moving forward, once a student has a determination as an unaccompanied homeless youth or a former foster youth, they are good to go moving forward. All right, next key change. Determinations must be made as quickly as possible and no later than 60 days after enrollment. So again, this is something that y'all can be doing right now with your unaccompanied homeless youth. Start providing those determinations as soon as possible. Even, you can start preparing for next year. If you already have juniors that are unaccompanied homeless youth, you can start having those set and ready so that start of school year, you can hand those off and be good to go. Key change number 3. So more programs and officials are authorized to verify unaccompanied homeless youth. So this is really cool. This is a 2-slide key change, but now more people can provide determinations. Before, it was only just school district liaisons, HUD shelters, RHYA shelters, or financial aid administrators. It is now expanded. So bullet point number 1, school district liaisons or their designee. Or their designee is new. This means a McKinney-Vento liaison can designate someone else to provide determination. This can be a counselor, this can be a FAFSA mentor if you have one of those, but this is huge. So it doesn't all rely on the McKinney-Vento liaison to make those determinations, which could have been really helpful if you remember Lexi's situation. She didn't know who her liaison was until she was filling out the FAFSA, but she was still connected with other folks in her high school. So this is really great to know that it's not just the McKinney-Vento liaison to create these determinations. Second bullet point, director or a designee of a director of an emergency or transitional shelter, street outreach program, homeless youth drop-in, or other programs serving individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So this means it does not need to be HUD funded or RHYA funded. It is really any program, any shelter that serves individuals who are experiencing homelessness, which is great because we know a lot of our students, if they were going to a shelter, they weren't asking, oh, by the way, are you funded by HUD? How does your funding work? Like, that's not a question our students would know to ask or even that to be on their radar. Now, this just really expands and opens up all programs, all shelters that work with individuals who are experiencing homelessness. All right, on our next slide, we have more of our programs and officials. So this next one, TRIO or Gear Up, director or their designee, this is a whole new group of population that can provide determination. This is completely new. We're really excited to have this new group since sometimes our students are connected in these programs. It will be nice that those folks can now provide determinations. And then lastly, financial aid administrators at another institution who previously made a determination in the same or prior award year. So what this means is if a student was at a community college, for example, wasn't identified in high school, their financial aid administrator made their determination, and then they transferred to maybe a four-year institution. That financial aid administrator determination will then follow the student and will be accepted. So it's expanded. We're glad to have these more programs and officials that we previously had before. All right, key change number 4, financial aid administrators must accept documentation from authorized entities for homeless youth. So all those people that I just mentioned on the key change number 3 slides, financial aid administrators must accept that documentation. And documentation from the entities can be a documented phone call, or it can be a written statement. I always prefer the written statement or the sample form, which I'll talk about in a little bit, because it's nice to have that paper trail. You can easily send it to the student, send it to financial aid. Not to say that documented phone calls can't happen. It's just, I find it a little bit easier to have, again, that paper, that tangible piece. Next slide. If the student has received a documented determination from, again, any of those people on key change number 3, the institution must not request additional documentation, proof, or statements unless there's some sort of conflicting information. And conflicting information doesn't mean the financial aid administrator being like, no, I don't want to accept that. That's not conflicting information. There needs to be really clear evidence that proves that this determination, this documentation is incorrect or not valid. So some examples that we've heard in the past from some of our scholars is sometimes the student will be asked to provide multiple letters of determination. We had one student during the pandemic being asked to get something notarized in the middle of the pandemic, so completely unnecessary. So as a liaison or as their designee, because that's new, financial aid administrators should not be accepting, but must not be requesting additional documentation than what you have provided. All right, our key change number 5, financial aid administrators must make unaccompanied homeless youth determinations for youth who cannot get determinations from any of those authorized entities as above. So we know many of our students might not be identified in high school, nor are they in an area where there is a shelter or a program. So then it would fall on the financial aid administrator to make those determinations. These determinations must be based on a written statement or a documented interview with a student that confirms that a student is an unaccompanied homeless youth. And so on the next slide, again, it should really just focus on, do you meet this definition specifically from the McKinney-Vento Act, and may be made independently from the reasons that the student is in the situation. So we always say it should focus on the if, not the why. And this is important for y'all to know in case you have a student that maybe you identified in high school, they took a few gap years, now they want to go back to college, and maybe they're reaching out to you for a determination letter. Sometimes the financial aid administrator will accept old letters. Other times, if you feel comfortable and want to provide a letter for that student that you previously had from years ago, you can go ahead and do so if you feel comfortable doing that. But if you don't, then this is a push for you to say, contact your financial aid administrator. This is in the law now. Financial aid administrators have this responsibility to make unaccompanied homeless youth determinations for youth who cannot get determinations from any of those authorized entities. So just wanted to put that on your radar so you were aware of the steps for a student to follow. All right, next slide. Provisional independent student status. This is a little tricky, and I'm going to try my best to articulate this. But there are times where students who might not qualify as an independent student as both a homeless or foster youth, but maybe they cannot reach out to their parent for any other reason. So when they're submitting their FAFSA, they might have some sort of unusual circumstance. Here are a few examples listed. So parental incarceration or being estranged from parents. And again, they don't meet the homeless and foster youth definition, but they aren't in contact with their parents. They might go the route of a provisional independent student. And that means the financial aid administrator will do a dependency override. And what that means on the next slide is that the financial aid administrator will do something called professional judgment, and they make a case-by-case basis. But what is important to know is that provisional independent student status and homeless and foster youth determinations are different and distinct. They kind of are going through the same pathways, but then once they get to a financial aid administrator, it veers in two different ways. So provisional independent student, they go through professional judgment, really based on the financial aids, what they believe. Sometimes they'll ask for 3 forms of documentation. It is really more gray area. Whereas homeless and foster youth, when they get to the financial aid, if it even gets to the financial aid office, it's more black and white. Is, do you meet that definition? If yes, then great. You move forward in that way. There isn't professional judgment in homeless and foster youth. But we know that sometimes students who have unusual circumstances may realize that that's a root issue of homelessness and foster youth. So sometimes we might need to ask a little bit more probing questions, because it is easier to go the route of homeless and foster youth rather than provisional independent student, because again, we don't have that professional judgment piece with financial aid to deal with. So it's a little bit confusing, but just wanted to flag that for y'all. So in case you are working with students who they don't meet that definition of homeless and foster youth, but they don't have contact with their parents, know that there's a whole other section that students might be able to qualify and be independent that way. All right, next slide here. We're going to turn it back over to Lexi, because I shared a lot of changes that are happening for the 24-25 FAFSA, and Lexi's filled out the FAFSA a few times now, so I would love to hear, her perspective, what her process was like with filling out the FAFSA and what these new changes would mean for her. So Lexi, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello again. So, yes, I have had quite an experience with the FAFSA. Unfortunately for me, well, not unfortunately, I guess for a lot of people, it can be confusing filling out the FAFSA on your own and feeling like that's something that you have to navigate on your own. So, knowing that you have support from an adult can be really useful, not only just for your own state of mind, but also quite literally to help you fill out the documents correctly, to help you with what funding you'll receive. So for me, my FAFSA horse story is that my freshman year of college, so I guess my senior year of high school when I was filling it out, the first time I filled it out, I had someone with me and I filled it out, understood all the questions with their help, and I received a nice chunk of aid that I thought met what I needed, if that makes sense. The second time I went about filling out the FAFSA, I felt confident, a little too confident. Um, I was in college, it was my freshman year already, so I thought, you know what? I can fill this out on my own. I got this. And I remember seeing some of the questions and just feeling not 100% on my answers, but I just figured, it's not that big of a deal. Truthfully, I didn't think about the implications of filling out the FAFSA incorrectly. I just tried to do my best. I didn't want to reach out for help. I was a little embarrassed. I just wanted to try and do it on my own. That reflected in the aid I received my sophomore year. I believe it went down by a few $1,000s. So it made a huge impact, and I immediately noticed and I went, what did I do wrong? I actually reached out to Schoolhouse Connections through the scholarship program. You get one-on-one support, as was mentioned earlier. So I was able to sit down on a Zoom call and actually go through my entire FAFSA documentation for my junior year. So last year, I sat down and I went through the whole document with the help of Schoolhouse, and I felt a lot better about all the questions, and I didn't feel like I had to navigate it on my own. So I found out that filling out the thing correctly, which seems like general information, but for me, I didn't know that filling it out incorrectly was going to make a huge impact on the aid I received. So I experienced that firsthand, and I like to share that story because I'm hoping that other kids won't have that experience, because it's really hard. It's really hard to know that you might have missed a few questions that could change a lot for you. So, what do the new changes mean for me? Well, as far as going and filling out, describing why I should be considered a homeless youth every year, I've explained this before. It's very difficult, and for me, all I want to do is move forward. I want to see the future, but if I have to keep stepping back and looking in the past, it's really hard for me to be as optimistic when I feel like I have to keep constantly going back and describing where I used to be. So it's nice in a sense for healing purposes to be able to have a solid letter that I can reuse every year, and I don't have to go and in-depthly answer all these detailed questions again, because I'm ultimately just trying to move forward and fit in. And I think that that's the case for a lot of other people. It brings up a lot of trauma re-discussing the things you went through. So it's nice to be able to have these revisions. So for me, I'm extremely excited about this. I think this is going to make a huge change for me as a student. And I'm excited to take a look at the FAFSA this fall.
Awesome. Thank you, Lexi. And I just want to share, all these changes for homeless and foster youth. We're so excited it's happening, but there are massive changes happening for the 24-25 FAFSA. We've been doing trainings on this for, the last 2 years. And I got to say, like, these are kind of getting overlooked by the general big 24-25 FAFSA changes. So know that if you are working with financial aid administrators, this might not be on their radar. So we'll give them patience. We're trying to do a lot more training on our end. The financial aid administrators are aware of these homeless and foster youth provisions. All right, I think we'll go on to some best practices. Oh, in addition, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We'll have time at the end to answer all questions, both for me, Lexi, and Karen. But also, if you have specific guidance and tools that you think would be helpful to implement policies, let us know in the chat. We will look through those at the end. So we can go to the next 2 slides, best practices. So definitely explaining a lot of the changes for the 24-25 FAFSA, conduct campaigns, let folks know, send out emails. I mentioned already identifying your unaccompanied homeless youth and providing determinations as soon as possible. I'm going to put in the chat a link to our sample form letter. So if you're like, I don't know how to provide a determination, we have this form for y'all to use. You just make a copy, you download it, make a copy, put your letterhead, fill out the form, and boom, you have the determination for the student. It really doesn't need to be anything super complicated. It can be just as simple as this. Once the FAFSA is available, please encourage your students to fill it out as soon as possible so they can get the most amount of aid that's awarded to them. I am not sure what it is in New Jersey, but I know every state typically has a priority deadline for 4-year institutions. So at the conference, I learned that some states, like in California, they've pushed their priority deadline by a month because the FAFSA has been delayed until December. So before it was March 2nd, it is now going to be April 2nd. Texas, for example, or no, Alabama, they are not changing their priority deadline. So the priority deadline, I think, is February 1st, and they are not changing it. So again, we still don't know what time or what date the FAFSA is available in December, but they are not changing the priority deadline. So again, shorter amount of time for students to fill out the aid, shorter amount of time for students to make a decision of where they want to go. That last bullet point, encourage students to reach out to the financial aid office, even if accompanied, to see if there's extra aid or resources available. So as I mentioned on the FAFSA, when they're answering yes to the homeless question, it is only unaccompanied homeless youth who are answering yes, but there might be specific resources available on the campus or at the institution for all students experiencing homelessness, not specifically unaccompanied. So we always ask students, reach out to the financial aid, let them know that they are experiencing homelessness with their families. So that's not going to be reflected on the FAFSA, but there might be extra aid, extra resources, maybe a support program available. On our next slide, I think we have more best practices here. There might be a financial aid night partnering with local colleges. Again, so many changes with the 24-25 FAFSA. So if we can, group together between K-12 and higher ed to work on the FAFSA together, that should, hopefully alleviate a lot of more concerns because there are financial aid administrators there that are trained on this. Another piece is remind students that the FAFSA needs to be filled out every single year. So typically we always have, one student that they are unaware that they need to fill out the FAFSA every single year they're applying for college. They think it's kind of like applying to college, you fill it out once and you're kind of good to go moving forward. So remind students every single year, hopefully, this year's an anomaly. It was just in December, but every October 1st, the FAFSA should be available. They should have a reminder on their phone and fill it out as soon as possible. Partnering with higher ed liaisons or other support programs to help, with that warm handoff, that transition piece that Karen has mentioned earlier. And then lastly, create an FSA ID. If there's one thing that you take from my presentation, if you're working with students, have them create an FSA ID right away. And if parents are involved, they should also create an FSA ID right now. You need date of birth, full name, email address, and social security number. So both for the student and the parent. To make sure you have all that information. Sometimes our students don't know social security numbers, so that's something that they can be doing right now, so they can, again, create an FSA ID so they aren't behind come when it's available in December. Another piece, students and parents, again, parents if applicable, must provide consent to the IRS to receive federal student aid. This is a new piece. We are already expecting some students and families to feel not comfortable with sharing information to the IRS, but this is all for, but tax purposes and just streamlining the assets and everything. The only way to receive federal student aid is by providing consent. So this is a new piece. To start talking about this with your students, with your families, so they aren't scared when they come to this question on the FAFSA. All right, moving forward, want to make sure we have time for questions. Perfect. So we'll talk about some resources really quick, but please put the questions in. We have 10 minutes. Karen, I'll run through the resources if you don't mind going in. Okay. Oh, yeah, great. So we have our FAFSA and youth homelessness slide, a quick guide for counseling staff working with students experiencing homelessness, NCHE's credit accrual, and NCHE's school counselor support for students experiencing homelessness, the higher ed page, the FAFSA page, our sample form that, again, I linked in our chat. Our next slide, we have opportunities for y'all to get connected with us, either on Facebook, Instagram, X. Always I'm going to say Twitter. It's weird calling it X. LinkedIn, YouTube. We have a ton of our recorded trainings on YouTube, so check that out as well. And then our last slide, I believe, is our contact information, maybe. Oh, sign up for our mailing list. Yep. Opportunity for you to get all this information directly to your mailbox if you want to scan that. And then we have our contact information. So I am going to pause here. We have questions. Karen, if I missed anything, let me know. Let's see if you have any final words. Feel free to unmute. And then I think we'll just open it for questions and discussion.
Hey everyone, this will be a good opportunity if you have general questions that you would like to ask that other staff member will benefit from. I do want to say thank you, Karen, Jillian, and Lexi for the information. We appreciate all the resources you have shared. I'm going to just give a few brief pointers to keep in mind while we see if there's any questions in the chat or if anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask. Just quickly, for those of you, remember that there's a point of contact at your schools that you should be collaborating with, and that's a school social worker for school counselors. Make sure that you're communicating with them regarding the students that are being identified in your building that need support as well. We want to make sure that we are also filtering those students that are identified as displaced through your point of contact so that we can be notified at the district level as well, and be able to provide them additional support, not just FAFSA information, but other resources that they can benefit all year round. So what we want to do is collaborate with one another in identifying the students so that we are supporting all around. So it's really important that you let them know if a student comes to you indicating that they are displaced so that we can identify them and provide those supports. I also want to thank Mr. Pullens and his team, as well as other school social workers that are here in this presentation. So if there's any questions, please feel free to ask now. It's a great opportunity. We have two amazing staff members from School Connection, plus an amazing personal story through Lexi, who has shown perseverance, has shown resiliency, and can actually speak to us from her perspective of what are the supports that were provided to her that were beneficial. There's also an evaluation in the chat. Please make sure that you are completing it. This will serve as attendance and feedback for us as well here at the district level.
Yes, good morning, and I have a question. The sample letter that was provided, of course, it will go on our letterhead. Does that have to have the school stamp on it, or does that have to be notarized?
So that's a
It does
question
not
for
need
me.
to be notarized. Yeah.
That's also a question for me, Jillian. So for those of you that are school counselors or school social workers, as a homeless district liaison, I can provide that letter for you. So it will be one person. You don't have to worry about it as long as I have identified the student and I'm notified, I can support with that ask. So that's something that we can connect separately as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then Anna, I had a question. Someone messaged me directly about the HESA, HESAA. So I believe it's an alternative application for financial aid for students who are undocumented but have lived in the state of New Jersey for 3 years or longer. If those students can apply for the 9-digit numbers that are assigned to them, so they can apply for state aid in December. I am not familiar with the state aid in December, or the state aid HESA or HESAA. I'm not sure how you call it. I'm not even sure if that is open or available yet right now. I know in California that they have something called the CADA, which I'm assuming is similar to what this is in New Jersey. That has all, I believe it's at a hold as well. So they're waiting for the FAFSA to be available, and then they're going to mimic FAFSA to represent the CADA. So I'm not sure if that is what's happening in the state of New Jersey, but for students who are undocumented, again, we want to make sure that they're not filling out the FAFSA, and they should just stick with the HESA and not use any of those numbers for the FAFSA.
Thank you, Julian. I also want to just refer everyone back. If you're a school counselor, please make sure you are communicating with Mr. Pullins regarding any specific questions regarding Newark Board of Ed. So please, if there are specific questions that are not general, that you feel that you need more guidance, just connect with him as your district level supervisor.
And I also want to note that within our scholarship program, undocumented students can also apply. So that is something that we want to highlight, and I'll put it in the chat again for folks. Oh wait, nope, wrong one. We have so many leaks here. All right, here's our scholarship.
Jillian and Karen, I know that when everyone registered, they did add some questions that maybe they would like to get answered. I don't know if you're able to read one or two perhaps from the registration list, in case that perhaps will benefit some of the other team members, more general.
We can pull those up, but I did note that when I looked through the numbers, some folks were saying they're working with middle school students, and so might not necessarily all this be super applicable to them. And I'll challenge you and say that we should start talking to about college and FAFSA and career readiness in middle school. That was a conference that I went to, and I was surprised to hear that starting in 6th grade, there are some organizations, some schools that are already awarding scholarships to pay for college as long as they maintain, certain GPA requirements and attending these programming. So again, if you are working with middle school students, start talking about this process and letting them know different college and career opportunities. This one program specifically in Florida, they by high school, they're already working on internships with potential career paths. And it's a really great way for students to really, they're not waiting until college to decide what do they want to do with their life. They are already figuring that out within high school, so that when they get to college, they know their path moving forward. So I am going to again try to look and find the registration. But Karen, I'm not sure if you have any questions or anything else you want to answer.
I was just going to add, when you were mentioning about working with middle school students, I think in my experience, it really helps students to see themselves in that place and moving towards college. And so in particular, I was just thinking of an example. I worked with a group of our immigrant students in our school district, who many of them were undocumented, but some of them weren't. And starting in middle school, we started to do some college visits, because we were hearing even from our middle school students that they were saying, well, college, we're not going to be able to make it to college. Our parents didn't go to college. We're not going to, we just don't see that as an option. And so we really worked hard to start taking our students to some of our local colleges and putting them in opportunities where they could really see themselves in those environments. And then we saw from our students that they started to get excited about, oh, here's what I could actually, this is a dorm room. Look at, I could actually stay at this place, or I could actually go to this class, and I could actually do some of these things. And it helped them to start thinking about then, when they were picking their classes, even as an 8th grader entering into 9th grade, that they were thinking about, I'm particularly interested in this one thing. Maybe I should start to look at, are there any classes I can take as electives that help move me in that direction? So it's never too soon to start talking about options and start helping students to really see themselves in those environments.
Thank you, Karen. I also want to mention to the team that when we are working with families, we are supporting and identifying everyone in that family. Sometimes we have a mix of students that are elementary, sometimes high school. So I think the reason too why we brought this information today is so that everyone has more knowledge and more resources in their toolbox, that if you're working with a family that you have identified at the elementary level or middle school, that and has a high school student in that family, but you're also telling the parents, make sure you're communicating with, your school counselor for that student. So it's spreading the word that these resources are available. So sometimes you may not be working directly with a high school student, but the family may have a child in high school. So we want to equip everyone with just knowledge, information, so we can continue to identify and support our displaced students and families. So just to better utilize those resources as well. So it is now 11:31. I want to thank everyone. If there are no additional questions, I don't see any in the chat in case I missed anything. If you would like to unmute yourself, we can maybe add one more question. But if everyone feels ready with the information, I just want to close out the presentation by saying thank you again, Karen, Jillian, Lexi, for introducing us to new information, opening us up to being able to support the students and families with pretty much changing their family cycle, right? Their future. This is an opportunity where our students can really, break the cycle of displacement, of homelessness, and do something different with themselves, and know that there are staff members in place that are supporting them along the way. So I appreciate, as always, being part of your trainings that I've taken in the past. All the resources the Schoolhouse Connection provides to us as homeless liaison. I'm always on your site, looking and reading and sharing, so I appreciate it. I did share the scholarship with the school counselors as well when I saw it. So I also want to make sure that they are utilizing that resource. I want to thank everyone here on this training, school counselors, school social workers. I have no words to say how much of a support you are to us at the district level in making sure that our students are identified and supported. And you are the one seeing them every day, interacting with them, calling the parents, figuring out what's going on. So I want to say thank you for the work that you do, as always. We're here to support. I also want to thank Supervisor Mr. Pullins, who's in this call, my director, Ms. Harvey, that I believe is in this training as well, and other supporting staff at the district level that are supporting me in my role to bring in trainings like this to expose our staff to more information. So I'm hoping that we can do part 2 as well at some point. So again, thank you, everyone. I know you have a lot to get to now for the rest of the day on a Monday, so I appreciate your time. Make sure you are completing the evaluations. It just helps us understand more what the needs are, your feedback, but also attendance to today's training. Thank you.